anxietycenter.com.
Chris, greatly appreciate you being here again, taking the time on a busy day to join us and field the questions from our recovery support members. I truly appreciate your help with that.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. It's nice to have your perspective, and you're working with clients on a day-by-day basis, so I'm sure you hear a lot of questions. So we're ready to take your questions. So who has the first question?
I can go. This is Judy.
Hello, Judy.
It's good to be here. I've been listening to Skype calls for a couple of years, so it's so awesome to actually be on the call.
Oh, thanks for joining the call. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I've been with Anxiety Center for a few years, and I've been working with a counselor there, and she is beyond incredible. I mean, I don't know where I'd be without her. Mm-hmm. There's no question. But I do have to say, Jim, I gauge my progress on your progress. And I have to say, I felt like I was one of the worst cases ever, for sure, like everybody thinks.
Yeah, that's right.
And I thought reading your story, you definitely were an intense case. And so, but then, I feel like I keep progressing. And I do believe I'm 70 to 75% better. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I think I'm not better than that is every time I'm getting close to recovery, or I feel I'm getting close to recovery, I have a huge stressor that happens in my life. Mm-hmm. And then Grace always says I fall off the bike a little bit, and you always get back on, and I always do. And then I'm getting there. And then again, a big, huge, and these are big stressors in my life. Mm-hmm. And so my concern is, am I ever going to get to the point I can recover from the hyperstimulation? Because that's what I feel a lot, because of these stressors, and because life does happen. Right.
Yeah.
And again, so that's my concern. And I look at your progress, and after a few years, you definitely sounded like you were recovered pretty much. And I'm now 2 years and a month in, and I'm not there. So I've been comparing my progress to your progress. And now that I've gone past the 2 years, I'm like,
yeah.
Am I too late, or is this not going to happen for me? So anyway, that's what I've been thinking about and wanted to talk to you about.
Sure. Yeah. Well, fortunately for me, during my recovery, things were fairly stable in my life. I didn't have major stresses coming along. Some of the ones that could have caused stress, I actually backed out of. So as you know from my story, I discontinued quite a few things. The only thing I maintained was work and home, and work was, bare minimum. So I was able to just focus on my recovery and get better. So for you to compare yours to me would be difficult because you've had stressors. Now, I've also worked with clients, and I'm sure Chris has too, where you do make good progress and all of a sudden life throws a major curve. And that is a major stressor. And so their progress is going to be delayed, even though they're managing that stress as best they can, doing deep relaxation and keeping their thoughts in check and all that. It's still stress. And we still have to function through that. So it's understandable to have progress delayed. Now, the good news is, this doesn't last forever. Usually these major stressors subside over the course of time. Now, there's some things we can do to help that along. We don't want to be undertaking major stressors during recovery. As you know from some of the notes we have at our website, it's best to set off those big decisions and changes until you're recovered so that you don't have to deal with them while you're recovering. But if you can do that and you stay the course, a lot of times these inconvenient ones that come along that aren't planned usually subside, and we do get that window to settle. I just add one more thing. The skills you're learning now, it's not like you have to start over. It's just that you use those skills, anchor them as you're working through these stressors. Just know that once the major stressors leave, you should have enough window to get your health back on track.
Yeah, that sounds good. I know that life is really topsy-turvy for sure.
Yeah.
And another thing that all along the way for these last few years, I still haven't gotten over completely the fear of these symptoms. So when I'm feeling really good, I really do feel like, wow, this is over for me,
Yeah.
and then when it comes back, I do get scared, and I feel like that is a problem for me. The minute I get scared of it, I feel like it's kind of got power over me almost, and it's
Yeah.
hard not to be afraid of some of these symptoms because they're just so fear-based.
Yeah. Yeah. And that'll change too. Typically, we don't lose our fear completely until we're through this and we see, recovery progress to the point where we're not concerned about it anymore. We might have a few symptoms left, but we don't care. But if we get to 5% better, and then a stressor comes along, and all of a sudden we're going backwards a little bit, it just seems to perpetuate the notion that, well, I'm not recovered yet, and so the fear is quite there, because at the back of our minds we often think, well, is this really going to work for me? And so until we get to about 90%, better, we still don't have that confidence. So again, that's coming too once you get, a little bit further down the road. But it's all understandable. As you know from our materials, that darn brain sure likes to hang on to those fear messages.
Yeah, it's like a habit, like a bad habit.
Yeah.
And I look for it sometimes when it's not there. It's like, okay, where it, it's just crazy how my brain, as much as I don't want this anxiety ever in my life, it's almost like I'm still looking for it, and in a strange way. So.
And that's understandable. I think most people do that until, again, you're almost clear of the forest. We keep checking over our shoulders, so to speak, to make sure we're doing okay. But again, once you get to the other side of this, you'll start to anchor that confidence, and you'll feel much better about it. Now, that doesn't mean that even 2 years after you're recovered and doing great, that if you have a stressor come up and some symptoms return, you might not get the feeling again, because, again, the brain is supposed to remind us of danger. But that's all normal. We just have to dig back into our containments because, no, I'm good. I've overcome this. I've recovered. I don't have to worry about coming back again. So we can keep doing that for a while, even years down the road. Just recognize it's part of the extinguishing process. It's all normal for the recovery.
Okay, so you do see hope for me even after 2 years of this struggle, I have to say.
Well, Judy, 2 years is not a long time.
No?
No, it's not. For me, it was different too, because that was my sole focus. My sole focus was recovery. My life was stable. I cleared everything out, just focused on recovery. But that wasn't level 2 recovery. That was just level 1 recovery, getting my body back on track and getting symptoms down. I never really started level 2 recovery until I felt much better. And only because I didn't know level 2 recovery existed until I got through the other side. And then as I started feeling better and getting back into life, I'm thinking, whoa, here comes some stress back up again. What was going on there? And then I started looking at level 2 recovery concepts. So it's a long process, to go from struggling with anxiety to getting out the other side where we don't even think about it anymore and we're living a normal life. It's years often, because, again, that for me, 2 years was level 1 recovery only. That's all I did, focus on it, containing and not, triggering myself off, not falling for the anxiety tricks. So when a person is doing both levels of recovery, you can see it can take longer, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I just want to end with just thank you guys so much. Thank you, Jim. And thank you, to my counselor, Grace, and everybody else. I don't know where I'd be without Anxiety Center and you guys. I get choked up thinking about it because it was so scary. And when you feel alone with that kind of fear, it's the scariest place to be. So I'm very grateful. And I want to say hi to Carol, because she has helped me so much, because I went through a really horrible traumatic divorce, and just listening to her and I pray for her, and she sounds so much better, and she gives me hope too. So thank you so much to everybody.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And you're more than welcome. We've lived it. We know what everybody goes through, and we know how important it is to have support as we move forward. So we're blessed to be able to provide this service, to help others. So, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Judy, you will get through this. Stay the course. 2 years is not a long time, especially when you have stressors, interrupting all the time. I work with a client, and we had the same thing. And it's just as she was getting to the place where she was starting to feel free, some other big thing would show up out of her control. And it's like, oh my. She'd manage it fine. It's just that the stress was there and those symptoms would come back. And just like you, she was still afraid of them until she was completely clear. So trying to get to that completely clear spot was a challenge with these stressors showing up. But finally it all happened, but it took time. So yeah, just be patient.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, that gives me hope. Thank you. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
As we're editing the audio from our last Skype session, I wanted to also add this. During my recovery, when I was getting rid of my symptoms, I focused on level 1 recovery only. Fortunately, at that time, there wasn't a lot of negative things that came up in my life, as I mentioned. So I kind of lucked out during that phase of my recovery. What I mean by that is because I cut back on so many things in my life, all I did was do the little work I could and worked on my recovery. And so my underlying factors really weren't playing a big role at that time. I mean, they were to some degree, but not overly. Now, if there was a level 2 recovery option available back then, I would have certainly done it, because if I didn't have the break of being able to focus solely on my recovery without a lot of extra stressors and things, it would have probably taken a lot longer. Because if I'd have been able to, if I was forced to have to work and interacting with people that I didn't like and struggling with all my underlying factors, it would have taken longer for my body to gear down. So, all this to say, if you are able to work at level 1 and level 2 recovery together, you'll probably speed up your recovery even faster than I recovered. Again, just because I didn't have those external stressors going on, I was able to get my body back on track faster. But again, if I had underlying factors there, such as people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a whole bunch of others that we have that usually fuel anxiety, it would have taken my body a lot longer to recover than it actually did. So when Judy was saying, 2 years, it's really not a long time, especially if you're doing both levels of recovery, which she is doing. So if you are working on recovery and you are working at both levels of recovery, you got to be patient. It just takes time to get everything working. And another thing I wanted to mention is that during my level 1 recovery work, my wife was very understanding. She put no pressure on me during that entire time, all those 12 years. She was disappointed and sometimes frustrated and sometimes upset that I couldn't do certain things, but she was really good at not putting pressure on me to go beyond what I could manage. She allowed me to recover at my own pace. And so, again, if you have that as an underlying factor, say, for example, you have a relationship problem going on during your recovery, well, it's going to be difficult to get your body stressed down to the point where you can recover because you have underlying factors in an unhealthy relationship going on at the same time. Or if you have job pressures and, a boss who's not understanding what you're doing and putting pressure on you, and if you're a people pleaser, that's also going to add stress, which is going to slow down recovery. So again, overall, if you are able to work at level 1 and level 2 recovery at the same time, I highly recommend it, because you will speed up your recovery process overall, rather than someone just working at level 1 recovery, waiting it out, and then starting level 2 recovery down the road, because those underlying factors are going to continue to slow progress down. So again, I know it takes time and I know it's hard work, but if you can do level 1 and level 2 recoveries at the same time, it's best, because you will speed up your recovery process. No question about it.
Chris, did you want to add anything?
There was a couple things that came to mind if I could add, and it might be something that others on the call could benefit as well. 70 to 75%, first off, that's fantastic. For you to feel that you've made, and if you were to ask yourself, Judy, did you ever think that you would be at a place where you could say, I'm 70 to 75% recovered when you first started therapy?
No, especially because way early on, before Anxiety Center, I tried to do medication and it did not work. It made me so much worse.
Yes.
So it was very scary. Once I thought medication didn't work and I didn't join Anxiety Center yet, that was the scariest place I think I ever was. Mm-hmm. And so to be this far without having to be on medication is, to me, almost miraculous with how bad it was. It was bad, yes.
So that, first of all, is something to celebrate. I think that's something to celebrate. Pardon me. And then I really like that Jim talked about not comparing ourselves with others. Our journeys are so different than someone else's, and our bodies respond to treatment very differently than someone else's. And it doesn't mean that either person isn't doing the right thing or they're not practicing their strategies consistently or persistently. It just means that our bodies are responding to the meditation, to the renewing of the mind, the containment strategies, the underreacting, all the containment strategies and the work that Grace. And by the way, I love Grace. She's excellent. I know her. Yeah. She's a colleague of mine in a different association, and I love all our therapists at Anxiety Center. But Grace is awesome. Mm-hmm. And so when one of the questions I had for you was, but you kind of answered it, I think, in one sense, was you said you're 70 to 75%. So that left like, well, what is the 25 to 30%? And one of the things that stood out for me is the thought that you have, can I ever recover? Yeah. And it seems to me, and I don't know you well, but just something, and if this doesn't fit, you can throw it out. But one of the things that I would want to question and ask is, it seems that you're creating a meaning. You're attaching a meaning of what it means about your recovery when a new stressor comes up and you're experiencing symptoms again. And sometimes that meaning is what can trigger the fear. And what I heard is this uncertainty if I will ever recover.
Right. Yeah.
And so I would invite you to maybe consider exploring a new perspective and really renewing your mind. The amygdala needs constant reminders, and your amygdala, as you know, is your bodyguard. It's on guard. It's trying to keep you safe. You can tell it, hey, you know what? I'm safe. It's just a stressor. It's not a setback. And it says, Judy, I love you so much that I know you think you're safe, but I can't take that chance because my responsibility is to keep you alive. And so any concern I have, I'm starting the stress response so your body can be prepared to perform at a peak level in the face of stress or danger, whether it's real or imagined. I don't care. I need to keep you alive. And so the amygdala needs ongoing repetition. And so changing and detaching what it means to have ongoing stressors that are brought about by life events. These are things you can't control.
Right.
And when you fully recover, you're going to have these stressors that are going to evoke stress responses. And that doesn't mean you haven't recovered. 4 years ago, I went through a very challenging scenario at another place of employment, 5-6 years ago now, maybe. And concurrent with that, I had lost my father to Alzheimer's. And so there were two incredible stressors that were going on that I can assure you I would not have handled nearly as well if it was 20, 30 years ago when I was in the midst of my anxiety. Mm-hmm. And all of that evoked a lot of stress. And I had to rely on my containment strategies, but I did not attach a meaning that, oh my gosh, I'm back to where I was, or I haven't recovered. I normalize it. This is a very difficult event, and I don't know your events, and I don't need to, but you have some really significant life events that pop up. And you mentioned a divorce there that you had gone through. That is a significant loss and a significant painful life transition. So that is not, you don't have to have problematic anxiety. You don't have to have problematic anxiety. You don't have to struggle with containing. You don't have to have a formal anxiety diagnosis in order to experience incredible stressors and stress responses and anxiety symptoms when you're going through major life events. There are a lot of people who don't have problematic anxiety who are now exhibiting incredible stressors under the current world circumstances that we have.
Right.
So first off, just normalize it. And I would say, let's kind of, if you can, detach from creating a meaning that this is any indication that you will never recover.
Okay. Yeah, that's what Grace always says. I'm really a lot of ants with me for sure. All or nothing.
A lot of ants. The ANTS. That's right. A lot of ants. That's right.
Always, never. Yeah. Yes.
And one of the things I tell my clients, it doesn't seem like you necessarily need this, but for other listeners out there, when I look at progress to encourage my clients, I have Jim. Can I take some time to talk a little bit about progress and how I share what to look for? Okay.
Absolutely.
So I look for three things when it comes to progress, and certainly not right at the outset, but a few months into therapy. This is what we're going to be looking for. I'm going to be gauging, and I want to teach clients how to gauge a reduction in the intensity of the symptom, a reduction in the duration, and a reduction in the frequency. Now, that doesn't mean the elimination of the symptoms, but if you think of the volume on your stereo, for example, and it's at an 8, well, can the volume be dialed down to a 7 or a 6 in a couple of months? It's still loud. The music's still playing. In other words, the symptom is still present and it's still intense, but are we noticing a gradual decrease in intensity, in frequency, and in duration? So intensity, how intense is it out of 10? Is it gradually coming down? I have clients who say, Chris, I'm still feeling it. And I said, well, tell me out of 10 on average over the last maybe month, how intense would your symptoms be? And they say, well, I'd say about a 6. I said, do you recall what it was when we first started? You mentioned that it was a 10. So yeah, they're still present, but there's progress. And then how about the frequency? Well, I would probably sit and catastrophize for about 2 or 3 hours. Okay. And how about now? Well, I catch myself after about 30 minutes. Now, you're still going to fire stress responses, and we're still going to release those darn stress hormones, adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, into our system during the 30 minutes. So we're still going to feel the stress. But what is key about recovery is they have stopped engaging in their anxiety behavior from 3 hours to 30 minutes. That's progress. So we talked about intensity, we talked about duration, and then frequency. How often is it happening? Well, I used to have it every day. I used to feel dizzy every day. I used to feel these tingling, numbing sensations every day. I said, how are you doing now? He says, well, there are a few days a week, number of days a week I don't have it. Okay, they're still present, but maybe it's not lasting all day. Maybe it's not lasting as long as it normally did, or you're having reprieve 2 or 3 days in between. So progress is not the absence of symptoms. It is a gradual decrease, and there's an ebb and flow, 2-step forward, 3-step back. But those are the three things that, in general, that I look for over a period of time, is that there's a decrease in duration, intensity, and frequency.
Yeah, that's great. That's great to look at it like that, because I am so all or nothing. So it's like, I want to be completely recovered.
Yes, of course. Yes. And I have clients who share with me, Chris, I'm doing my containment, but I still feel anxious. And I remind them there's a shelf life to your stress hormones. The containment strategies are meant to just communicate to the body that we're safe, and we don't need any more release of the adrenaline, noradrenaline, or cortisol into the bloodstream. We're telling the adrenal glands and our fight system, okay, I'm safe. I'm not scared of a stress response. I don't need anything more being pumped into my bloodstream. But the unfortunate part is we do have, it's going to be there for the next, if it's adrenaline and noradrenaline, in 20 to 30 minutes, if it's cortisol. So we're naturally going to feel the stress and the stimulation of a stress response, so long as we don't trigger another one as it's leaving our bloodstream, for example. So I have many clients who say, I'm practicing my breathing. I'm not afraid of what's happening, but I still feel jittery. I still feel on edge. Well, the containment strategies don't magically remove what stress hormones are in the bloodstream. They just help the body come to a place where it stops releasing any more stress hormones into the bloodstream.
So if you have stress hormones in the bloodstream, it feels like sometimes 3 hours. That's just constantly me pumping more without even realizing it. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. I would tend to think, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is if we're not re-triggering, another stress response cycle. For example, if a stress response happened at 10 a.m. and we have cortisol in our system, and we practice our containment strategies, and we're not afraid of what we're experiencing, then I would typically think that within about 30 to 45 minutes, the body ought to be calming down from the actual stress response. And for symptoms to last longer than that, I think we're looking at the body just in general being overstimulated. It may or may not necessarily be you're triggering anything. I think the body's just overstimulated and these symptoms are lingering. So muscle tension, twitching, things of that nature. But the actual fight or flight response, Jim, when you say that really somewhere between 30, 45 minutes, that really ought to calm down?
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said. Depending on the degree of stress response that's triggered, it can, die down within moments or to up to 30 minutes or more if you have a major one. But if you're having symptoms for 3 hours, it's typically because of hyperstimulation and how your body is trying to keep its homeostatic set point much higher than normal. Because if you remember from the graphs we have in, I think, chapter 3, hyperstimulation keeps our cortisol levels and stimulation higher. Now, I want to qualify that. It doesn't have to be cortisol. When the nervous system becomes hyperstimulated, the electrical activity in the nervous system accelerates. So we could have normal cortisol levels, yet still feel hyperstimulated, because that's where the body's set point is. So now we can make things worse if we do have, anxious thinking that triggered a stress response. So we're having hyperstimulation bumped up even higher. That's why we can have symptoms lingering for hours and hours, sometimes even days. It's just that the body has, set itself at a high level. We've added more cortisol to it or stress hormones, and it just stays there and takes longer to come down. So, and that was one of the challenges I had through my recovery is when I used to see some of the mental health professionals in Regina, they would say, well, you shouldn't have symptoms after about 30 minutes. And I'm thinking, well, no, I have symptoms all the time. Well, no, that can't happen. Well, yeah, it does. I'm experiencing, I can tell you. Well, that means you're just thinking anxiously. No, I'm not thinking anxiously. So I had this dialogue until I figured out, well, when we're hyperstimulated, the body just sets its stimulation point much higher than normal. So any little bump of stress hormone is going to keep it up there and take a long time to settle. So what you were saying, again, long story short, Chris, is that you're right. Stress responses, their effects should end after about 30 minutes or so if it's a major stress response. If we're symptomatic long after that, it's typically hyperstimulation related, and that just takes a long time to bring down. I think I wanted to add one more thing here too, is that when the body's hyperstimulated, it can regulate itself erratically. Like I think all of us have had moments where, even though we're, symptomatic and stimulated, and all of a sudden we feel calm for some reason out of the blue. It's just like, oh, this feels actually not bad. And then we can be feeling calm, and all of a sudden we're spiked right up again for no reason. Again, that's just the nature of what can happen when the body becomes hyperstimulated. It can set itself erratically. So all of those can be involved. Now, good news is when you work at bringing your hyperstimulation down, the body settles and can settle more quickly, and it stabilizes. It's not going to do this erratic behavior. But until the body is fully clear of hyperstimulation, expect anything at any time, because that's just what happens.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
You're welcome. Chris, I love what you said. Absolutely. Great comments and so applicable. So I appreciate that.
Great. Good.